I think one thing that's important is to distinguish joy and happiness because sometimes people they put it together, right? But there's a difference between a feeling and a state or an emotion. So you can be joyful and unhappy. And that's important to understand because happiness is fleeting.
This is A Joyful Rebellion, the podcast that explores that moment you realize the life and success you worked so hard to create didn't come with all the fulfillment you thought it would. I'm your host, James Walters, and I want you to be the author of your own story. Each week, I connect with people who inspire bold answers to the question, what do I do now to create a life I love? If you're ready to start answering that question for yourself, you're in the right place. So let's start a joyful rebellion. Kareen Aristide, thank you for being here on A Joyful Rebellion today.
It is my pleasure. Love the name of the podcast.
Thank you. I wanted it to embody that time in someone's life when they have gotten to a certain level of success as far as society or maybe their family is concerned, and they've checked all the boxes. Maybe they've got the job, the degree, the family, and the house, and they're doing pretty well by cultural standards, but they just don't feel great in themselves as themselves. And then they have a decision to make. Do they just keep going and hope it gets better? Or do they have a joyful rebellion and have to leave some things behind in order to become happier and become more themselves? So yeah, that's why I wanted to talk to you, because it sounds like you help people do that. When I was looking through your info and the things that you've done to help people in the mental health space and in the personal growth space as well.
That's great.
You've been helping people a lot in the personal growth space, and I wanted to have a conversation that surrounds people's expectations, because everyone has expectations for themselves, what their life is supposed to look like, but also people have a lot of expectations of us when we're growing up. Our parents want us to be successful and happy. Sometimes they think they're the same thing, and a lot of times they're not. So I would love to have a conversation based around what others' idea of success for us is, and what you find when you're helping people who outwardly, they look really successful, they're just not happy. Tell us about your background and how you got into the space you're in as far as your work and the kind of people you help.
I love this conversation, first of all. So I'm definitely going to get very passionate for sure. I started out in life as a counselor, so employment counselor, mostly working with people with their careers. I loved my job. I loved being there for people and help orient people. And I was moving to another city and couldn't get hired because I was pregnant with my second child. No one would have me because I was 6 months pregnant. But that's how I discovered this world of mompreneurs doing their thing. Because for me, being a mom was great. But at the same time, I felt, well, I'd be losing myself as a person, as a professional. So finding this out really revolutionized my life, I have to say. And I became a mompreneur thanks to my children. Fast forward 5 kids later.
Wow.
So 5 kids later, I was building this business and it was really taking momentum. And I crashed literally into an apartment building.
Oh, wow.
So I crashed into the basement apartment window of an apartment building. And obviously, I'm still alive. It's a miracle, really, that I am. But that is when I discovered the importance of self-care, of soul care, even. Because when I survived this, I actually wished I had died. With all the success that I was in, it didn't make any sense. And so that is where I started this journey of understanding it's not about what you do. It's about who you are. It's about being before doing. And this is where the journey began to really uncover why I was driving myself to death. I was an overachiever. I had the savior complex, superwoman syndrome, you name it. That experience got me to step back and understand the importance of knowing yourself, being that you're supposed to be to have that joyful existence. To make a long story short, I ended up going back to school, doing a psychology degree, and being certified as a human behavior consultant. All of that allowed me to help people understand the why behind what they do things and knowing that it's okay to shift, it's okay to pivot, it's okay to reinvent yourself, all of those things, and the importance of living from the inside out. This is what I'm mostly passionate about, helping people live from the inside out, removing any barriers for them to get to that place of being that radiant self that they were born to be.
On your website, I'm looking at your website right now, and in a lot of your information, I've seen that phrase come up that says to focus on being before doing. Let's dive into that just a little bit more, because I don't know if this is a male female thing, but a lot of what I've been driven to do is just do things, get things accomplished, check things off the bucket list or goal list, whatever it is. And I feel like I'm always doing, and people have said that, they're like, you're always doing something. Can't you just be? I'm like, that's what I am. I being when I'm doing. So I don't know. So let's dive into the being before doing. What's the distinction there?
The first thing is you need to have the self awareness to understand your makeup, because a lot of the times when you do have that doer mentality, it's important to know the motivation behind what you're doing, because that's going to determine if you're doing because it's actually what you feel that you're meant to be doing, or if you're doing it to get accepted or to fill a void or anything that has to do with not being in touch with yourself, right? In the work that I do, I adopt a model of human behavior based on the DISC model of human behavior. It's really based on personality types. Some people are being when they're doing, and understanding that they're not being defined by what they do, but they do because that is their makeup. That's where it's important to know the difference. I talk a lot about plagiarism in my work, because a lot of people, they basically are living a life that is being imposed on them, whether it's because they see somebody in a certain space and they want to be like this person, they adopt the trajectory and go there because they admire the person, but it's not necessarily what will make them shine or what will give them that reason for being, that purpose, right? And then there's others, it's mostly because somebody's living vicariously through them, like a parent that gave them a sort of, oh, you're good at this, or I see you at this, or you won't succeed unless you do this. And all of those things then become part of their identity and they go into it. And that's when sometimes they realize that, okay, something's not adding up because I'm supposed to be happy here and I'm not. Having that self awareness to say, okay, what I'm doing now, is it based on truly who I am? Or is it something that I've adopted because either I don't have a choice or because I'm worried about expectations? So, are there expectations coming from myself that I'm putting on myself, or are there expectations coming from other people or even society as large? Because society is based on rewarding performance. It's based on doing. People get rewarded, they get celebrated, they receive awards for things that they do,
Yeah.
and not for who they are.
No, I've never received an award just for being me. And that's a lot of the way the world works. When someone is giving you an award, it's because of something you've accomplished. The Olympics is a great example. That's a very personal thing. That person trained their body, their mind to be able to
Right.
accomplish a specific feat. And in so many cases, they're not even competing with the other people
Yes.
on the field or whatever it is. They're competing with themselves, their own best,
Yes. That's
personal
right.
record. And I mean, as many jokes as the baby boomers and Gen X people have made about the millennials just
Yes.
getting awards for existing, I don't know that those really ever happened. I think we were just hate on the younger people because that seemed cool at the time. But I would love to dig into the disc profile because it's something that I've been hearing about a lot more. I'm an SC, by the way, which didn't make me happy to learn because, we as a
We should dig into that.
as a group, we don't get a whole heck of a lot accomplished as SCs. But yeah, I guess the world needs us. But I love the Enneagram, the Myers-Briggs. I love all of the personality profile models. They've all given me some sort of insight, and some are really useful for how you might operate in the workplace. Some are really useful for how you might operate with a personal relationship, for example. And to be able to know someone's type in a certain model like the DISC or Enneagram is so helpful. I know you help people with their careers a lot, and DISC seems focused on that part of life. Is that why you chose to be certified as a DISC?
It is not.
Let's get into it.
Well, first of all, when I got into this, I was no longer a career coach or counselor.
Okay.
So I was actually into personal growth and I was looking for something that I could be certified in. I ended up in a session that really, life does that sometimes, like serendipity, you end up somewhere. And I loved this because they helped save my marriage.
That's cool.
Because, yeah,
Okay, I'm paying attention now.
that's right. Because, I'm actually an IDS and my husband is a D. So
There you go.
Actually, I didn't realize that I had so much D. And that is the D part that was really kind of suppressed because his D was so high. And I was like,
Yeah.
what's wrong with this guy? But then when I understood the needs, the way they think, how they operate, and I realized, not only did I realize that, okay, he's normal, it's just a different way of seeing life and dealing with life. And then I realized that I got some too here. And I was more comfortable with that part of me because there's certain part of the D that is very appealing, like the drive. But then there's this other part where the competition and things like that. There was a bit of a realization that I had that I was basically not embracing this part of me because for me, competition was a bad thing in my head because of my
Because you're
right.
yeah, right.
All this to say that I began to understand that this model is the best to not only understand yourself and others, but to also better get along with people. The thing is, it's very simple, right? It's two principles. The first principle is what is your pace? Are you more reserved or more outgoing? Even a 5-year-old can let you know, yeah, this is where I fit. And then where are you oriented? Are you more oriented towards people or are you more oriented towards tasks? And what I like to show people is like, let's say you get into a room, there's a party going on. What are you going to do? Are you going to
Leave.
seek out somebody and start talking and say, how you doing? And all of that? Or are you going to fix chairs,
Like leave.
help in the kitchen? So those are the things that people need to know how they're wired because then it's easier to embrace it, but also to explain to people, I'm doing this not because I'm trying to upset you or whatever. Like this is how I tend to be because we all have all four. It's just a different percentage or how much one is more than the other, right?
Yeah.
Knowing that about yourself helps.
Yeah, I would love to back up a little bit because we jumped into the disc. For everyone listening who's never heard of this before,
Yes.
I want to give a little description, a little bit of background. What is the D, the I, the S, and the C? What do they describe in terms of the four parts of a person's personality?
If you can think of a circle and you divide the circle in two, at the top of the circle, you have the outgoing people, and at the bottom, you have the reserved people. Now, that same circle, you divide it again in top to bottom, so left to right. So you have the left side, you have the task-oriented people, and the right side, you have the people-oriented people. And so you can already tell, okay, where do you fit? In the disc model, if you put the letters in your little circle with your little division, you can figure out where you fit and what type describes your pace and orientation. If you're outgoing and more toward tasks, then you're deep. Description is dominant or direct. I rather say direct because it's a little bit less pejorative. Then you go clockwise. The next type is the I. The I is also outgoing like the D, but more people oriented. It's on the right side of your circle. Then you keep going down clockwise. The S is also people oriented because it's on the right, but in the bottom. So we said bottom is reserved. So the S is people oriented, reserved. A word for S is supportive. Oh, I forgot the word for I, which is inspiring. Your last style is C, same as S, reserved on the bottom, but it's on the left side, which is task. So the C is reserved and task oriented, and a word to describe the C type is cautious. These are a way for people to orient themselves very easily. I love it because it's so adaptable. And the company that I'm certified with, they have assessment for children too, which is awesome because, and for children, it's basically pictures. They give scenarios, and then the child says, yeah, that's more me in this scenario. The whole family can have a language that they can express. So if the S type child is being rubbed off by the D type parent, they understand, they can relate, they can speak the language. And this is what helped us raise our kids. And my husband understand because most of us are S, the only one with the D. With I have some D too. It's really important to know these things because then there's less misunderstanding, there's more adaptability, there's more also harmony, really,
Hmm.
because everybody knows each other's needs and understand how to meet the needs and also how to talk to each other so that it can really come across as I'm not against you here, I'm just being myself. And if that is an issue, let's talk about it.
And if you've got a dominant or a direct person in the family and they just want to get things done, and then if you've got that cautious but supportive person, they want to get it done too.
Yeah.
However, the pace is very different. So
Right.
there can be some tension. And when you realize, oh, this person, their makeup is to identify something and go after it, and they're coupled up with someone who is more interested in doing it right or following the process, that's
Yep.
going to create some tension. And if you don't understand what's going on underneath a few layers down, it's a recipe for some resentment, for some miscommunication. Yeah. So, in that sense, the disc profile is really helpful for you to have an understanding of the people you're working with. And if you have a spouse, you're definitely working with them on a lot of different things, whether that's raising kids or whatnot. So, anyone listening, don't think of it just as a workplace kind of thing, it's a people thing.
It really is a life thing, you know. I believe that this is way more than soft skills. It's really human skills. And the earlier you can get your kids, we're talking family wise here, the earlier you can get your kids to understand how they're wired, it really helps them not only in the school environment, but in the home environment and even with their friends. I mean, my whole family is this out, you know, and I
Yeah.
have two kids that are certified consultants.
Oh,
One of
wow.
them is 21, the other
That's
one is
cool.
19, and they're incorporated in everything they do. It's just amazing how they thrive because of understanding these things.
Do you have the experience of working with people in a business? You work with a lot of entrepreneurs who tend to be probably DI.
Mhm.
Would you say that's probably in that space, willing to take risks, willing to charge hard, but also a lot of them have to care about people? There are a lot of entrepreneurs that don't, I'm sure, but is there a common mix of
I would
entrepreneurs you work with?
say in the realm of coaching, I have encountered all types because it depends on the field. For example, if I'm working with accountants, translators, or, people that are entrepreneurs, they don't necessarily have the same way of operating. It's really a question of knowing how to get them to progress in a way that is comfortable for them, and at the same time challenge them to get to that next level. As an entrepreneur, absolutely, you have to work your D. Like, even if your D is very low, you have to work it,
Yeah.
but there's certain fields that it's not as needed because, for example, a translator, one of my clients, her issue was being able to really relieve herself from the day-to-day operations because she was a SC. It was really important for her to do things properly, and it was hard for her to delegate certain things because of that need.
No control issues whatsoever.
It was a joy to get her to see that you will be more productive if you do what it is that you're good at. Everything else can be either delegated or put into systems so that it could be generated without you having to lift a finger. You know what I mean? When she got into that, it made a huge difference. And she was able to get into that place of working a little bit more to get to that next space in her career and journey. So it really is a question of understanding how to navigate. I honestly prefer working with C's and S's because if I give homework, they'll come back with the D's and the I's. The D is like, you really need to make them think that they're making the choice and the decision. You can't just give them homework back.
Yeah.
You're in losing battle. And then the I so much distract, like the shiny object syndrome is real. So it'll take 3 months for an I to do something that a C will do in 2 weeks. You know what I mean? And so that's why I prefer working with them. I don't know if you've decided or seen what my high type is. I did say it, but with the I piece for me, it's that sense of knowing that the C is what I need to work. And because of that, that is where my growth comes, because everything C is my blind spot. And so this is where I need to work so that I can be a well-rounded entrepreneur, because you can't really succeed. You can have the D, which will get you somewhere, real great at starting things and getting things going, but then all the
just a lot of broken promises left in the wake.
Exactly.
The more I learned about the whole DISC model, it was profound for me because I realized that if you ever feel like you're doing the job that you think you're supposed to be doing and you're happy with your work, but you just feel burnout, it could be because your job is requiring you to operate in something that you are just not naturally dominant in. For example, in my own work, I'm a photographer. And the thing about being a photographer is we only actually hold that camera. People think we take pictures all the time. And I'm just coming out today is the first time in 5 days I didn't have a camera in my hand for probably 10 or 12 hours a day. So like the last 60 hours in the last 5 days. But the next 3 weeks, I won't touch the camera one time. I'll be looking at the computer. So when I have the camera in my hand, I am very much working my direct the D, because I have to get people to do things in front of the camera that they want to, how they want to see themselves. So I have to inspire them. I have to encourage them. I have to relate to them, keep them comfortable. But I also have to tell them, hey, I need you to be here at this time and all of the things. And I have to drive the boat. They're not going to drive things. So I make those happen. But then once I don't have my camera in my hand anymore, I can go down to zero directness and zero inspiration and operate in my supportive and cautious. Doing that editing work is very detail oriented. It's very process driven. And it's also something I'm really good at because I've had so many years of being detail oriented. So lucky for me, I guess, if I was shooting all the time, I would probably burn out pretty quickly because all of that interaction with people, all of that
Drains.
Yeah, it drains me completely. But then I can spend several days doing the editing work. And even though I'm working just as much behind the computer, my energy doesn't just go away like it does on those photo days. I think that's a practical example for anyone listening to maybe check in with yourself, learn a little bit more about your own makeup and how it goes. Does the group you work with do assessments for children? Do they have anything maybe online for adults that could go on and just do a quick check before they dig in deeper?
So there's several different assessments for leaders, even financial assessments, adults. There's also for health, fitness instructors. Like they have niched a lot of these assessments, but there's also just a standard assessment that you could do. There's even smaller reports, like a 6-page report, all the way to a 59-page report.
I can
Depends how
only
deep you
guess
want to go.
like the D is choosing the 6-page report. E
That's
is
correct.
choosing the 59-page report.
Got it.
Where can people go to find any of those you just mentioned?
Yeah, so if you go on my website, kareenaristide.com, you'll be able to see all of the different resources. Also, if you go on my Sleek bio, sleekbio.com/Kareen there's some free resources there as well. I have almost 5 hours of free disc training. Even if you're not ready to get a report, you could listen to that training for free and understand yourself just by listening to that free training. But then if you want to validate what you think of yourself, you can do the assessment.
I wanted to spend a good bit of time on this subject because someone who is listening and they heard about DISC, now you know how it's helpful. You've got some practical application of things that have worked for other people. And maybe you're a little more interested than you were 20 minutes ago. Taking it beyond that, I also wanted to have the conversation about expectations. And sometimes, the disc and the profiles play in with that so well because sometimes your expectation is to do something that's totally outside of what your nature is, what you are naturally inclined to do. And also the people who are surrounding you, maybe their expectations of you are completely outside of what your natural tendencies are too. So that doesn't mean you can't chase your dreams. It just means you have to have some understanding about yourself. And that's why I wanted to start the conversation about your work when you start working with people who outwardly they're pretty successful, but inwardly they're pretty miserable. And they have to figure out, okay, what do I do? I still need to eat and keep the lights on and all of those things. They have the potential because right now they're very successful. So you know they can produce result, but they probably can't keep going at that pace doing what they're doing for much longer without crashing, hopefully not into an apartment building, but hopefully, and I'm glad you're okay, by the way, but they're going to crash into something. What's that conversation like when you hear that from them and you realize, oh, you've been going down a path that is not natural for you and you don't realize it yet? How does that go? Unfortunately,
It usually happens when the crash happens.
okay, that makes sense.
Most people do not have the realization, especially overachievers, that they're running themselves empty because there's an adrenaline that keeps you in a certain pace. What happens is, even if you go to them and say, listen, you're going to crash, or you need
Yeah.
to pause, they will not have an understanding of that at all, right? Especially if they've been doing this for years. It's a blessing when something happens to stop them. Usually, it's either burnout or a family tragedy that kind of takes them off that course and be like, oh, what's happening here? And this is when they're open to have the conversation and take that time to be with themselves, right? I'm a mompreneur, so I work a lot with mompreneurs, parentpreneurs. The thing is, there's expectations not only in career wise, but also, when it comes to family. Being able to prevent the burnout or the crash is what I find the most important. The work that I do is to share my story, what happens to me, so that it can get them thinking because they see themselves in me. So they understand the thought process and the trajectory. So it helps them to, oh, I don't want that to happen to me. So let me, inquire about what led to that and how can I remedy whatever it is that I need to remedy so that it doesn't happen to me. There's a lot of work in bringing them into that conscious awareness.
Hmm.
Someone that has gone through it is in a better position to do that. But still, the majority of the time, when I start working with people, something is already wrong or something has caused them to stop, even though they do not really want to stop. We want to make sure that they get healthy or better quickly, which happened to me as well. After my crash, I recuperated and then I went back to my old habits and then I crashed again, but this time it was a mental crash, you know? And that is when I realized, okay, like you need to go deeper here. I saw a psychologist and I was able to kind of get at the deeper issues that was creating this mindset or this way of being. That's when the being before doing kind of developed out of that experience and realizing that this is not just for me. I'm meant to help people with my story. That's how I got into mental health. Now, my work is blending personal growth and mental health for holistic growth because you can't dissociate it, especially in entrepreneurship. And there's not enough talk about that, the mental health of entrepreneurs and demystifying, removing taboo, normalizing is the work that I do now. And I'm actually in the process of writing a book on how to manage your mental health according to your personality style.
Oh, I like that. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's pretty exciting work.
That'd be cool. I just launched a podcast a few weeks ago, and it was with a lady who her career was going great. Her relationships were not going great. And then she had a crash. The relationship and the career kind of all crashed at the same time. And
Wow.
she hit what she called rock bottom. And she stayed in that place for quite a while until she started interviewing other people who had hit rock bottom. And she was trying to pull herself out from finding people who had been where she is and were now successful and trying to find what all of those had in common. And she mentioned, just like you said a second ago, that you haven't really hit rock bottom until you're willing to do anything to get out of it. And that's probably why people don't come to you until they've gotten there.
Yeah.
So let's say you've got 10 entrepreneurs that you're talking to, and they all come in next week and they've all hit that rock bottom. Either their spouse left them because they just can't deal with whatever's going on, or they got ousted from their company, or their company went bust. Whatever it was that got them to that place where they are open to receiving information and feedback and they're open to growth.
Yeah.
Is there anything that maybe 7 of them would have in common 3, 6 months, a year before that moment? Is there any kind of like where there's smoke, there's fire kind of a situation? Was there anything that happened prior to that that you were like, oh yeah, the writing was on the wall a year ago as they're talking through, and you didn't change anything and now we're here? And I guess the reason for me asking that is, like, if someone was taking inventory right now of the things that are going on, maybe the things that are annoying them, or the feedback they keep getting from other people, like a spouse, like a kid or something like that, is there anything they could maybe start paying attention to that they haven't been?
I love that question. This is really good. I think that a lot of the times when we're close to hitting the rock bottom, there's a numbness that happens. It's really hard for people to realize that if you don't take care of that, it's going to escalate, right?
Mhm.
So if you're feeling right now that you're going through the motions, and when all is said and done, when you've done all the work, when the adrenaline kind of wears off, what state are you in? So it's very important to be in touch with what is the general state because sometimes activity brings up to a nice state, but there's a general state that is there. What is it? It should be joy. If it's not joy, if it's sadness, if it's frustration, if it's anger, anything that is not joy, then you need to look into this. And I recommend journaling. I know not everybody's into that, but journaling really gets you in touch with you. And sometimes you start writing something and you're like, oh, I was thinking that, or I was feeling that, or I had this emotion I did not know. So that time of self awareness and inner focus will get you to understand more what is that general state. Sometimes we're aware of it, but we just kind of snooze it off. We snooze it off by watching a Netflix, binging, or, there's always different things. Some people it's food, some people it's alcohol. So be aware of what you're trying to drown when you engage in certain activities. Sometimes it's not self destructive stuff, like sometimes it's work. That's the escape, right? But the people around you, they feel that state. So it's important for you to be aware of it.
Yeah. In almost every conversation that I have, because the point of this podcast is to connect the audience with people who have either been through their own joyful rebellion, which you have, or people who help others get through their joyful rebellion, which you also do. You've seen it from both sides. So you've seen it from having to get yourself out of that space. And now you know what's so valuable in helping others to get out of that place and to where they really want to be. And every time I have a conversation with someone like you who's seen it from both sides, we start talking a lot about awareness. And that's one of the hardest things, because you don't know what you don't know until it's right there in your face and you realize, oh, yeah, this is not the expectation I had of how my life was going to go, or how my relationship was going to go, or my career, or any of that. And then it comes back to that whole, this is how I thought it was going to be. And it reminds me of a quote I heard a long time ago. I'm sure a lot of people have heard it, but back in it would have had to have been the 30s or 40s, I guess, when John Lennon, he was a really young kid in grade school. And his teacher told everyone in the class to write on a piece of paper what you wanted to be when you grow up. And, it was that time when people would say fireman or policeman or, whatever it was. And he wrote happy. And the teacher said, no, this wasn't what I asked. The teacher called him up and she said, this isn't what I asked you. I want to know what you want to be when you grow up. Like, what kind of job do you want to do? It goes back to your quote of being before doing. And he said, well, if I do anything and it doesn't make me happy, it's not going to be worth doing. I don't know if he was all cool and profound, as a young grade school kid, but it is definitely something to think about, because if you can't be happy while you're doing what you do, it might be time to rethink it.
That's right.
Like you said, in the quiet moments, if you are having to distract yourself from being melancholy or thinking about, oh, I should have done this 30 years ago so I could have a different career so I would be happy. Well, maybe it would, maybe it wouldn't. But if you're having those thoughts, it's maybe time to at least explore why. And maybe someone could help you understand that, going back and having gotten that degree and being the attorney or whatever you thought was going to bring you happiness, but you didn't, that wouldn't have brought you happiness either, because it's just an external thing you're doing. You're not really getting to the right stuff that brings happiness, that brings joy. So thank you for that. Is there anything we haven't talked about that you would like to talk about?
I think one thing that's important is to distinguish joy and happiness, because sometimes people, they put it together, right? But there's a difference between a feeling and a state or an emotion. So you can be joyful and unhappy. And that's important to understand, because happiness is fleeting. And sometimes you're going to be in a situation where it's not fun. But the thing is, if you cultivate the joy, then you'll be able to endure whatever it is that you're facing. And that experience will create more joy. And eventually happiness will come back. And we're relational beings, right? And so if we are in a job, for example, that we hate, right? So we might hate the job, but it's preferable to engage in an activity that will keep us joyful.
Mm.
Even as entrepreneurs, sometimes we have to do stuff we won't like doing, and it's not fun, and there's no happiness there. But because we're in the state of joy, then it's easier to endure the less fun moments and those challenges or even those failures, knowing that this is just temporary. Things will get better. So cultivating the joy helps with the hope, and being hopeful, understanding that everybody goes through hard stuff. This too shall pass, and we move on. So that I think that's important to really make sure that we cultivate.
So if I'm understanding you correctly, happiness and joy, two different things. If we related it to, say, a movie,
Hmm.
it's almost like happiness might be a really happy scene in the movie.
Yes.
So it comes in and it goes, and then that scene is over, and then you move on to the next scene. It might be a chase scene, an action scene, whatever kind
Yeah.
of scene, but that happy scene was part of the movie and it showed up. It had its moment. We experienced it, and now we're moving on to the other stuff. Whereas joy is kind of the movie itself, or not. So someone will say, "Oh yeah, it was really." I mean, there were some moments in there that were a little tense, but overall had a great ending. Felt good when I left. Is that kind of a good analogy of how
Absolutely.
happiness and joy? I never
Yeah.
really thought about it that way, but it's kind of an interesting way to think about it.
Yeah. And the thing is, joy is really a kind of, how do you say that in English? Sometimes I have words come in French because I'm French first.
Okay.
So it's a leap, a way to get to, the different we could go through, right?
Mm,
Because, for example, if we understand that life is made up of ups and downs, then we're better prepared when the downs come. We understand that this is not going to define me or this is not the end. All of those things that contribute all the time to unhappiness, it's that the back end of our thought process that runs like a computer. I like the analogy of the computer because there's so many things that run behind the computer, right? And so if some of these things go off, then the computer's going to shut down. It's just not going to
yeah.
work. So it's the same thing. I like to say to people, think of yourself as a product. And whatever you need to do to get that product or a car, whatever it is for it to run properly, you need to pay attention. You need to change your oil. For my husband, when he does couples counseling, he does that. He says, it's time for an oil change. You know what I mean? Like, let's get together and talk about things because when you do that prep work or maintenance work, then you know that your car is going to have more longevity. So it's the same thing for us, like understanding what creates joy in your life. It'll keep adding to your joy tank. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Because happiness is way more fleeting because you could be so happy one day, like you're there, and then one phone call, okay? I don't know, a death of a loved one or something. Your happiness is gone. Now you're crying. You know what I mean? But when you're joyful, you know that this situation is actually going to turn out for my good eventually, as opposed to if your baseline is sadness or anger, then that situation will actually deplete instead of
Mm.
bringing you to your next level.
Gotcha. That's good to keep in mind. We've covered a lot today. Kareen, thank you so much for being here on A Joyful Rebellion. And I'll have your info in show notes. KareenAristide.com is where everyone can go to learn a lot more about what you do, how you help people. I really appreciate you being here today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for joining me today. If you've enjoyed this content and are thinking about ways to share your story or even get more joy out of your life, I have a free ebook that I'd love to share with you. It's called Plotting Your Joyful Rebellion, and I designed it to be a 5-step field guide full of guerrilla warfare tactics to help prepare you to overthrow any of the parts of your life you feel the call to rebel against. Go to ajoyfulrebellion.com and click on the link right there at the top to claim your free copy of the book. Again, that's ajoyfulrebellion.com, or simply hit the link at the top of the show notes. What sort of rebellion are you plotting right now? I'd love to hear about it. Connect with me on Facebook, Instagram, or through the website at ajoyfulrebellion.com. Thanks again for listening today, and be sure to stop by next week for another episode full of joyful rebellion.